There is one question that I've yet to answer on any of my social medias, and that is, why am I even doing all of this? Hello and welcome. My name is Britt, and those of you that have kept up with my videos to date will know me as a digital illustrator and a teeny tiny business owner. But what you may not know is that I'm also an ex-full-time video game artist. Over the past few months, I've been really enjoying sharing some of the behind the scenes of my process of starting my own small business and my creative journey as a freelance independent artist. But I haven't really shared why I'm doing it or what brought me to being a small business owner or freelance artist in the first place. So in this video, I basically wanted to get a bit more vulnerable and share a bit more of myself and my journey up until this point, so that anyone who's watching my videos will get a better idea of the context that I'm coming from and how I feel about my art and how I feel about my business. So stick around if that sounds interesting to you, because we are going to dive all into that. My mum is actually an artist, so she had a major influence on me when I was growing up, and it wasn't really a surprise to anyone that I was interested in pursuing a creative career. Despite this, the idea of doing art for games was quite a mystery to me. I'd never been a fan of maths and physics, which I wrongly assumed to be prerequisites for all game-related jobs. I basically thought that like everybody who worked on video games was a coder, which maybe at one point was more true, but in this day and age is definitely not. So as a teenager, starting to think about how I wanted to make a living in the future, I felt pretty torn. I had a lot of dreams, but I also had a lot of doubts, which is literally me at every stage of my life, to be honest with you. Luckily, my dad was a gamer too, so he didn't completely laugh me out of the room for my aspirations. And even better yet, he had a contact in the industry. One of my dad's clients was actually the, at the time, art director of the now shut down Lionhead Studios in the UK. If you're not familiar, Lionhead were responsible for some really iconic titles in the 2000s, such as the Fable series and the Black and White series. So for a kid that actually used to love and play those games, it was a really huge opportunity to be able to actually talk to somebody who worked for the company. So I gave this art director a very nervous phone call. And at the time, I was choosing my GCSEs and I was really het up about whether I should be taking ICT or physics or something like that if I wanted to eventually work in the games industry as an artist. And I still remember to this day what he said to me in response. And I basically took that advice and ran with it. I got a very cheap graphics drawing tablet. I don't even remember the brand. It was not a notable brand, I don't think. And I started to commit to digital art. Fast forward to 8 years later, I walked out of university with a first class degree in animation production, and shortly after, my first ever big girl job in the games industry as a 3D artist. Okay, so I'm skipping a lot here. University was a whole saga of breakdowns, pivots, and emotional chaos. I would love to do more of a deep dive at some point on my experience in art school and just all of the ups and downs that came with that and the things I learned, and any of my recommendations, I guess, for people that are wanting to go to art school specifically for animation or anything like that. If that's something that would be interesting to you guys, please let me know. But just know that there was a lot going on. Against all odds, I had managed to achieve my goal. I was 22 and working in the games industry in a job that I had dreamed about when I was 14. And that was a real pinch me moment. And that was also something I had so many doubts that I was going to be able to achieve up until that point. For context, they were quite tough on us. In art uni, our tutors would always stress about how difficult it was to get a role in the industry. And, rightly so, because it was quite competitive then, and I feel for anybody graduating now trying to get into the industry, because times are even more tough. But also I think that I had a lot of insecurity still. Like, those insecurities of 14-year-old me had kind of followed me to university, where I was worried that maybe I wasn't technology based enough because I had studied animation production and a lot of my skills were very traditional art based, as opposed to tech-based. So I was kind of going through the whole experience, not sure if I was going to be able to make it into games, or that a game company would immediately see my worth because I hadn't studied, for example, like a games art degree or something like that. So yeah, when I actually managed to land a job in the games industry, I was very chuffed. Felt like I had landed the dream job, and it was only up from there. First off, let's talk about the things that I loved about being a full-time corporate game artist, because there were things that I loved. Aside from all the validation that I felt in terms of landing the job in the first place, I did genuinely pursue games art out of a love for the process and the craft and the outcomes of that craft. In every job that I've had since I graduated, I have felt a lot of appreciation for the fact that I get to work on creative projects every day for those reasons. Like, I was getting to draw and 3D model and create for a living, and in that case, I had hit the jackpot as an artist, right? I also felt so lucky for the stability that I had, particularly at the time as a recent grad, and with a lot of my friends working in the animation industry. Most of them were on contract jobs, often very short-term contract jobs, whereas every job that I've had in game design has been a full-time gig, which stability-wise is really great to have, especially when you're quite early on in your career. And also, as I started to work for bigger studios, I got some really amazing benefits from my jobs, healthcare and dental and all of those things that I felt like a lot of my other friends actually didn't often get access to in their companies, especially not when you are a contract employee. So that side of being a full-time employee and artist was really something I was grateful for. I remember that pinch me feeling lasting for a good while during my first job. I'd moved over to Belfast for it, and I got to meet a whole bunch of new people and experience a whole new place. And it was so exciting to just be somewhere fresh, be in my first kind of office, and just experience the next stage of life, I suppose. The fact that I was working in video games was a huge part of that. The first ever game that I worked on was called Paleo Pines. I don't know if anyone watching will have heard of it. It's this incredibly adorable dinosaur simulator, and it was right up my street in terms of the style and the actual gameplay. So the fact that I was not only working in games but working on a game that really resonated with me was just super lovely. I'm really proud of the creative input that I've been able to have in all of the games that I've worked on. And at the end of the day, there's games out there right now in the world that I'm able to say I did make a major impact on artistically, and that's pretty cool. So we've all read the title of the video, and I'm sure that you are patiently sat there waiting for a but. And there is a but. Actually, there's a few buts, and none of them have anything to do with a specific workplace or project that I have experienced throughout my career. It's just more to do with some of my general feelings around my relationship to my career as a full-time game artist in the industry that have developed over the course of the last 5 years. A lot of my fellow type B creatives watching this will understand me when I say that putting your creativity on the clock, specifically someone else's clock, the way that you are required to during your average 9 to 5 job is not always easy. Combine this with some natural perfectionist tendencies and you end up with so many frustrating days where you are banging your head against the wall because your art is not happening fast or well enough to be completed in the time frame that you have between your strict 2 p.m. lunch break and your non-negotiable 4 p.m. catch-up, which is of course a show and tell of everything that you've achieved since your 10 a.m. stand-up. Just saying that whole sentence out loud made me stressed. And don't get me wrong, I know that pressure can be healthy and that a lot of this is just all in the experience of having a job. And on a good day, I can smash something out that I'm proud of and get an adrenaline boost while doing it, and everything is fine and dandy. But if I'm being honest with myself, I spent a lot of time at work feeling very anxious and frenzied by my lack of control over my schedule in a way that didn't make me feel my most genuinely creative either. I think for anyone, but especially for any other recovering people pleasers out there, Gang. It is very easy to become an overachiever as a creative person in the workplace. Like I said, I had a lot of enthusiasm when I started my first job, and particularly due to the fact that it was an indie studio and I was on a small team, it just naturally meant that I ended up taking on a lot more responsibility quite quickly within that team. So I started off just mostly focusing on 3D modeling and texturing, and then I was also doing VFX. I was doing 2D concepts. I ended up directing a 2D short film, and the list kind of goes on. And all of those things were great opportunities, by the way, that really contributed to the amount that I learned at that company. But all of those things were still incredibly hard work, and on my graduate salary, no less. And I'm sorry to say that this trend of getting more and more responsibilities added to my job role didn't stop once I was no longer a junior. A lot of the time, I would really overstretch myself like this at work, and I would justify it by thinking that when my reviews came round, I would be rewarded for the effort after kind of busting my butt for a really long time for them, and that was really demoralizing. And although I do think that companies can be incredibly stingy with their employees in a lot of these scenarios, I also had to acknowledge the part that I was playing in letting the scope of my job role get so out of hand in a scenario where, quite frankly, what you get out is not necessarily what you put in. On a more practical note as well, as a full-time artist, so much of my physical space and environment was depicted by my job. After years of moving around and getting different jobs and starting up in new places, it started to get kind of tiring and kind of lonely as well. So much so that for my most recent full-time job, one of my highest criteria for the job was that it be in London, because I had a community there. I had a lot of friends there that I had been quite separated from throughout my career before that time. And I'd realized it was really important for me to have more balance in my life, where I could hang out with friends more easily and experience like more of a rich life than I was before, where everything revolved around my workplace. So all of these things combined left me with this feeling that I just couldn't shake as a full-time employee, that the majority of my lifestyle was at the whim of my employers. Like I said, I think all of this is specific to the way I function as a person and the way I like to work, but this feeling, this sensation of being owned by my company made me feel quite helpless sometimes when I was working full time, in a way that definitely kind of chipped away at me over time. I think what got to me more as an artist, working specifically in the games industry, and especially if you're working for a successful studio in the game industry, is this idea of being replaceable. After all, as an artist, once you have the dream job that so many other people would love to have, because you get to doodle and draw all day, why would you complain about that when there is someone that's really eager to just take your place? Because everybody like me went to art school, where we heard that there was going to be no chance for us to get jobs, and even if you didn't go to art school, we've all heard about the starving artist, and we're all just lucky to be here. So some of this might be my personal projection. Maybe this isn't always the way it is, but this is the way that I felt at times, and I think that contributed to kind of taking the shine off some of the dreamy elements of getting a job as an artist in the games industry. Obviously, so many of us do work these 9-to-5 jobs, and I do think that they work for so many people, but I had something inside me for a very long time that was wondering if this was the only way for me, because I had examples, for example, my mother as a full-time artist, of people that were doing it differently and that were pursuing their own path. As much as I kind of sometimes did try and dull that voice down as just a daydreaming voice, it was very prominent. I would always toy, as many of us artists do, with ideas of personal projects and, developing second streams of income and that kind of thing, so that I could at least start to feel a little bit less tied to my main job and have a bit more agency over my creativity and just, I guess, my life in general. But I kept getting in my own way. I was stuck in a loop where I'd start off each job or each quarter of a job, and I would be intending to keep a good work-life balance. I'd really want to feel more relaxed in my free time so that I could start to kind of develop myself more as an individual outside of work. But my eagerness to please and my ambitious personality always meant that I found it very hard to say no whenever a new opportunity came up at work. If that was to take on more work, to try something new at work, I would just end up taking on a ton more responsibilities, only to then get burned out again when those responsibilities became too much for me. I would then pull back on my workload to better focus on my personal life, or maybe even work on a few of my own personal projects, or take a new hobby or something like that. But as soon as something else came up at work, I would end up just completely derailing and instinctively prioritizing my workload instead. I didn't want to be seen as any less than excellent in the workplace. And there was also some self-sabotage at play here. Getting really vulnerable, throughout my early life, I struggled with self-esteem, and my creativity was no exception to that. I think in my subconscious mind, it was easier to get this quick ego boost at work by taking on an extra project or an extra responsibility than it was to put the time and effort that would be required into bringing one of my own creative projects to fruition, for fear that I might fail. I constantly had this feeling that I had all this untapped potential that I wasn't doing anything with. And it would actually make me feel really down when I thought about that. Work was almost this distraction which allowed me to procrastinate exploring in the way that my brain was telling me I really wanted to. I had an excuse for not pursuing anything original or scary, because I could just say, well, hey, I'm too busy doing X, or I might have more time after we're done with X project at work, or the age-old one, maybe once I get this promotion or pay raise, I will have more money and therefore time and freedom to focus more on the things that are really important to me. Dangerous. And yeah, that cycle kind of continued for 5 years until about a year ago, when actually a conversation with my therapist gave me the jolt that I needed to really make a substantial change. So after a session of agonizing over whether or not to keep pushing for a promotion at my current job or try to pursue a more personal path with my art, my therapist gave me a task to do. She said that I should imagine my life as a canvas, and the amount of space each element takes up should match how important that thing is to me in the grand scheme of my life. So the life canvas is basically like a vision board of your dream life. Not your parents' dream life, not your friends' dream life, but the things you genuinely value and want to maximize on in your lifetime. Like a vision board, she encouraged me to mock it up visually too, something like a collage or even an actual painting. The idea is then to look at your current life and consider how closely it matches the distribution that's on your canvas. And to go one step further, look at the decisions you're making today and ask yourself honestly if they are leading you towards the vision you're laying out in your life canvas. That's kind of when it clicked for me. My job up until this point had most definitely been at the center of my life. But when I really thought about it, it was nowhere near the center of my life canvas. It was time for me to acknowledge that being able to schedule my own workday, being able to choose more of my own projects, being able to choose what location I was in, these things were all actually much more important to me than I had given them credit for earlier in my life. And they were worth so much more to me than having a better job title or earning more money or working for somewhere that was more well-known. What I really was craving was having the experience of having a job where what you put in is what you get out. If not in monetary gain, at least in the satisfaction of working towards something that you genuinely believe in. So last summer, I started to draw for myself again. They weren't just drawings for drawing's sake, which would have been great as it was, but I did have a goal in mind for those drawings. I wanted to take up actually an old project that I had discarded probably over a year before. That was to make a series of illustrations that I could sell online and hopefully one day at an art market or a Comic-Con. I actually have my eye on MCM, which I've yet to do yet, but October applications will be getting back to us soon. So cross your fingers for me. Maybe that dream will also come true. We'll see. For the first time in so long, I felt really motivated by a personal project, and I also felt like I had the mental space to actually make it happen. I was even posting about it on Instagram, and I was putting myself out of my comfort zone by starting TikTok, and I was really enjoying it. I was making the first steps towards having a sense of ownership over my creativity again after years. Because the thing that was actually at the center of my canvas was this idea of self-sufficiency, and I felt like I was finally actually working towards that by creating and sharing art for myself as opposed to constantly doing it for someone else's goals. And don't get me wrong, like, being self-sufficient at this point still felt like a very massive mountain that I would have to climb before I achieved. But it's like I had this new voice in my head that was saying I can do anything that I put my mind to. And I finally felt like I was able to put my mind to what I was doing. And that made me feel so much more powerful than I had before. At this point, I was still working full time as a game artist, but I had kind of made my peace with just being average at my job, because it was like maybe one day it won't be as much of a crutch anymore. I was valuable beyond just my job. October 2024 rolled around and I got blindsided. So I got made redundant. No surprises there. I mean, no beating around the bush. The industry right now is whack. And this is a fate that has very sadly befallen a lot of creatives right now. And not just creatives, to be honest. I think a lot of people in a lot of industries are going through this. I was very privileged when I got made redundant. I didn't have and still don't have any dependents on me, no family members that depend on me, no kids. And I also had just moved in with my partner, and he made a bit more money than me, so it was kind of like we would be okay getting through that together. And my heart goes out to anybody who is going through that and is in a tricky situation where you got to act pretty fast to get back on that job market. And it also kind of highlighted some of my feelings of discomfort about my whole life revolving around my employment at somebody else's company. But like I said, I was one of the lucky ones, and I had relatively low outgoings and I got a decent settlement. Anyone that is wanting to start a small business or has started a small business will know that time and money are like gold dust, especially when you're working a full-time job at the same time. It kind of felt like I'd been offered both of those things on this weird silver platter. I didn't have to negotiate, I didn't have to go through the pain of quitting. It had just kind of happened to me. And the biggest silver lining was that I knew exactly what I wanted to do at that time. I do want to be transparent about the fact that I did get this money and time when I started my business, because anybody who's seen my first ever video on how much I spent to launch my business will know that I did put in a decent amount of investment into just getting my business off the ground. And I would not have been able to go whole hog in the same way if it hadn't been for this situation with my previous job. That is just something to think about when you see maybe how quickly, I guess, I've got my business kind of up off the ground. I think it would have been a very different and slower story had I been still doing it completely alongside my full-time job. So instead of revamping my corporate CV and trying to get back into the terrible job hunt, I decided to go all in on Britt Bailey Art. I wrapped up my job at the end of October last year, and within a month I had my first set of illustrations complete and my shop website up and running, selling my prints, stickers and postcards, which was all that I had at the time. A month after that, I also had my Etsy shop running and plans for my first ever art market in the works. 8 months later, I can safely say that losing my job gave me the capacity to dream again. I took the first several months after losing my job to solely focus on building up my business, Britt Bailey Art. But now, considering the cost of all of that, which again, you will have seen if you've watched my first video, I do work in the game industry again. But this time I'm a freelance artist and I only work 3 days a week. And this is a very purposeful choice to work 3 days a week because I am taking seriously the fact that I'm centering my own personal artistic goals over those of someone else's company. And don't get me wrong, I still enjoy my game art job and I like the project and the people that I work with. And, I want to do the best job that I can for them. But on the grand scheme of things, I do see that job as a means to an end to allow me to keep chasing my own creative dreams. And that is the most important difference to how I used to see my work before. I have much better boundaries with my game art job than I used to when I was full-time. The instinct is still there, but I don't find myself automatically volunteering to take on more responsibilities in my job because I'm aware, first of all, of what I'm actually paid for. And I'm very aware of what I can actually afford to give to that job in terms of time and energy now that I'm also running my own business. My team doesn't value me any less now that I have better boundaries. And that was definitely something I think was an underlying fear, was that, if you aren't overperforming, then people will see you as lesser, treat you as lesser. But it actually doesn't really make a difference. They're just still happy that I show up and do my job in a good way. It doesn't matter to them whether I'm doing 8 other people's jobs as well. I think what I have found so gratifying about running my own business is having actual time set aside in my week to create things that I care about and to pursue creativity that is important to me, and also to be able to share and build a community around that. I get so excited on a Thursday and a Friday to actually just wake up and do my job. Even on the days when I'm doing my game art freelance job, I kind of just feel so much more peaceful knowing that it's not my be all and end all, that I have another outlet for my creativity besides my work, and even for my income besides my work. It is reassuring to me and makes me feel a lot less sort of anxiety and frustration around my day job, as I call it. And don't get me wrong, the double-edged sword of being a freelance worker is so real. You don't get benefits anymore. You don't get sick days. You don't get paid holidays. Sometimes there is even more hours of work involved in being a business owner, like when I'm crunching before a market or a convention, and I'm working way more hours than I would have done for my regular game art job. And those are all things that you should be aware of before, wanting to pursue being a freelancer over being a full-time employee, and are things that I can work on, because I think burnout can still happen basically even with my own business. So I need to keep tabs on my work-life balance still. And now I'm my own boss, so I need to take that up with me, I guess. Anyway, well, my point is, yes, there are pros and cons to this life, but for me personally, the mental shift that I've had since doing it has made all of those other things worthwhile. That canvas that was once eclipsed by my corporate creative career is now this colorful creative page that I can't wait to dive into and fill with even more of my own projects and ideas. Before I wrap up this video, I do want to make it clear that I don't regret any of the time that I spent at my previous jobs, or even the path that I've taken to get to where I am now, because I think it was all necessary for the journey. And after all, those jobs have given me the skills that have allowed me to even do what I'm doing now at all. Also, to reiterate, starting a business is by no means quick, easy, or cheap. And having that foundation of job experience and skills is what has really allowed me to actually get my business off the ground the way that I have. And the fact that having had that experience of working full-time, I'm now able to work part-time for a decent salary in order to support my business is incredibly valuable to what I'm doing. So I wouldn't change the journey to get there. I also don't think all of my problems have been just magically solved by me choosing to start my own business. I just swap them for different problems. I have to grapple with things like increased financial uncertainty, a lack of boundaries between where I work and where I live, and a whole new kind of imposter syndrome. But right now, I'm honestly feeling the most free and creative I have in years, and for that reason, I'm fully prepared to give it my best shot. One piece of advice I guess I'd give from this video, or want somebody watching this video to take from it, it would be kind of just don't wait for a miracle. Really think about how you want to be living your life and start trying to put those dreams in motion now, because that means that when an opportunity does come to change your lifestyle, you'll be ready for it. Like, don't miss the miracle when it comes because you're too distracted by something that isn't actually truly a priority to you. Because in another reality, I definitely wouldn't have been brave enough to make this big career pivot that I did when I got laid off. And I would have just been on autopilot and continued to repeat the same patterns that I had been up until that point. I think that working out what you want in life is an internal endeavor, but I do think that exercises like the life canvas can make the whole process more digestible and less painful. And if you're somebody that is watching this and is in a similar mental place to anything that I described in the video, just know that you're definitely not alone in feeling like that. It can be so overwhelming to want to make a big lifestyle change, and it can take a while to figure out how to do it and what that even is. You will get through it and realize your path. We always have room to evolve and grow. Just as my life canvas right now is fitting to what I want, I'm sure it's something that is also going to change and evolve as I do. As a side note, I'm also really intrigued if anybody watching this video has any other life hacks like the life canvas that has helped them when they're trying to make decisions, either life decisions or creative decisions, or they've just felt like at a crossroads or a bit stagnant. Are there any other exercises that you do that really help you to get out of a rut? If so, then please share them down below in the comments. I would love to know. Anyway, I am going to wrap that up here. And if you've made it this far in the video, then thank you so much for watching. I will be continue to upload my creative journey here on YouTube once a month. I have a couple more vlogs in the works, and I also have a video planned about how I upgraded my art market table setup. So if that seems like your kind of vibe, then feel free to subscribe. And if you like the video, then I would love it if you liked the video. And I will see you next time. Bye!